We're talking with Grover Norquist, President of Americans for Tax Reform. Welcome to Take a Stand.
Hey, good to be with you.
All right, Americans for Tax Reform. Tell us a little bit about the group. If people have heard the name, they've heard your name, but they aren't familiar with the group, give them a brief introduction.
Sure. Americans for Tax Reform was created in 1985. The goal was to help pass what became the Tax Reform Act of '86, which took the top tax rate down to 28%. And one of the things we did was we created early on the Taxpayer Protection Pledge, where we asked people to make a commitment in writing never to raise taxes. We now have about 190 members of the House, 42 senators who've signed that pledge and kept it. As a result, we haven't had a tax increase in Washington, D.C. since 1993. It's been 15 years now. It's the longest period in American history without a tax increase out of Washington. That's what's at stake in this next election.
Whenever I have people talk to me about tax reform, it ends up evolving to a discussion or a debate about fair versus flat. How would you summarize those different ideas about actual reform to the tax code?
Well, we want a flat rate income tax or a flat tax that taxes income one time, either flat rate income tax or a flat rate sales tax. They're economically the same thing. The reason you want it one rate is so that when the politicians look people in the eye and say, I've got a really good idea, they respond by saying, well, since we're all paying for it, we're all listening. We get in trouble when the politicians can divide us into different groups and mug us one at a time. Clinton did this, and so did and Obama's doing the same thing. He said, I'm only going to tax the top percent. No, that's a complete lie. When you tax businesses, you tax everybody who shops at that store. So people shouldn't be fooled by that. When you tax businesses, you tax everybody's 401k. But there is an effort to try and convince people that I'm going to give you something free because I'm going to steal the money from someone else and give it to you. At the end of the day, there's really only one pond that you can get the water out of, and that's the American economy. And when you take it out, you loot everybody.
All right, and when you talk about when you hear people talk about the fair tax and everything, describe for people in a basic way the difference between a flat tax and a fair tax.
Well, the flat rate income tax is your present income tax. You just have one rate of 15 or 20%. The fair tax, the retail sales tax, if they want to replace the entire income tax and the Social Security tax to get rid of the IRS, you're probably talking about a sales tax rate of 30% or so. If you privatize Social Security and only replace the income tax part of it, you could get it down to towards 10 to 15%. So I think it's very important that when we think about tax reform and moving possibly to a retail sales tax, that we at the same time take Social Security off the table, privatize it, because to try and raise enough money to pay for Social Security through the retail sales tax makes the rate so high that you end up with all the police state problems that we have with income tax. The police will just be standing at the back of Walmart instead of the back of your bank.
Now, when we talk about tax policy in this country, it's always talking about the federal tax code and what the tax rates are, tax incentives, pork barrel spending, all these things come into play. Yet so much over the last several years has shifted a lot of the financial responsibility and the tax burden going through state-level taxes rather than federal, unfunded mandates and things like this. Does Americans for Tax Reform have a capacity or a capability or a network to focus to more state-level issues? It seems like that... for me anyway, it seems like that's the front line in the fight right now as far as tax accountability, and there don't seem to be a whole lot of people on the national stage that are looking at state legislative issues and how they impact the bigger picture.
Well, Americans for Tax Reform started the pledge at the national level back in '86. Within a few years, we took it to the state level. So there are 1,200 state legislators who signed the pledge never to raise taxes. And the pledge itself was central to California's ability to say no to the Democrats and Schwarzenegger with their desire to raise taxes. It takes a two-thirds vote of both houses to raise taxes. We had every single Republican minus one, a guy named Nilo, every Republican except Mr. Nilo, signed the pledge never to raise taxes. They all kept their word. They looked Schwarzenegger in the eye and said, you're not hearing us. We took the pledge. We're never raising taxes. So they won. They passed a budget, messy, ugly budget, but not a tax increase in the budget. So that's an important project line. And certainly Americans for Tax Reform spends as much time at the state level as at the national level, because the center-right coalition meeting that we hold in D.C. is replicated in 45 of the states, where you bring all of the various parts of the conservative movement together to meet weekly in D.C., every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks in most states.
Is there any kind of maybe formula is not the right word for it, but is there information available or resources that people can utilize when they get into even a local level tax fight? And there's been so many lessons learned on the state levels and on the federal level on how to articulate objections to different policies. Is there any kind of resource that people on a local level, when their city council or their county commission's talking about property tax raises or hotel room taxes and those kind of things, any information available for folks on a local level?
Certainly, at our website atr.org, we have material on all levels of taxation and all the various arguments for tax hikes. A lot of local governments, candidates for local office, use the pledge at the local level. And so it's very important that all candidates for office should say, I'm never raising taxes, end of conversation. Elected officials can either govern or they can raise taxes to cover up the fact that they're not willing to govern. And that's the fight in American politics. Do you want to govern or do you want to paper up and pay for mistakes? You're seeing this with the bailout. Paulson, the Treasury Secretary, failed to govern. Bush failed to govern. They now refuse to govern, so they just want to take money out of the economy and throw it at a problem. It's like papering over a problem rather than solving it.
From the national seat where you sit, do you see any regions of the country or different pockets where people are energized and having more impact than other areas?
Different parts of the country being more energized? Well, California certainly raised up and stopped the governor and the legislature from raising taxes. Florida and Texas have been very good about saying no to tax increases. In those states where we've said no, you see more economic growth and more progress. Nevada's been pretty good at stopping tax increases recently. Unsuccessful. There have been tax increases in Virginia and in Michigan, both states that have economic problems as a result.
The reason I ask is in North Carolina, we've seen just in the last 7 years a 51% increase in government spending at the state level. And, the billions of dollars that means, that money didn't just show up on a bag on the front steps. That's coming out of the free market in North Carolina, coming out of businesses and private individuals' pockets. And so people in North Carolina, while they've been successful at blocking some policy-type things that were pretty ridiculous, they still are left aghast in what do we do to slow down this massive spending increases and tax increases in our state.
Well, and you see the argument that Obama might run more strongly in North Dakota than expected. When the politicians raise state and local taxes, they hire Democratic precinct workers with it. They hire people from Acorn with that money. They pay more money to government workers who know that they couldn't make the same amount of money in the private sector. So they're actually buying votes. So every time you raise taxes, you make a state more democratic. You'd think, well, don't people react and get mad? Well, well-to-do people, businessmen, react and move. So you take people who don't like taxes and they move to Florida and Texas, and the people who want to live on welfare or government checks decide to stay in the state. So all tax increases make all states more D.
Well, and so everyone listening to this interview right now, they're looking around them saying, well, that's North Carolina. That's exactly what's happened in North Carolina. Grover Norquist, thank you for being with us and talking to the folks listening to Take a Stand.
Thank you.